when we talked to Nick, Jake, I love going to New Orleans Football, which is Nick's site, and I think it's the best Saints site out there. If you really love the New Orleans Saints, it's well worth the price of admission. And he's always got very interesting angles up on everything. And one of the questions that he has asked recently, now there's a great kind of hypothetical about like what could Michael Thomas be with a different quarterback?
Right.
Like what are you potentially unlocking? And that's fantastic. But how about this one? It's about Saints players that could potentially grow into bigger roles. And I want to pick your brain on it in terms of maybe who you think out of these players would be set to make the biggest jump. One of the names on the list, obviously, David Onyemata, the Manitoba Mauler, a guy who was a fourth-round pick that they traded up to get, but that's because they knew the Packers are going to select him. Barely had played football at the time, and he just gets better every single year. And obviously, with Sheldon Rankins' contract coming up in the air, you need Onyemata to step up. Cesar Ruiz is on the list. Kind of thrown into the fire year one, and I think they were hoping for better. I mean,
didn't really know what they were going to do with him. Like,
it sounded like they wanted to play
him
center.
Him and McCoy going to play center.
Yeah.
One's going to play guard. We're going to see which one works out. It's like, look, and I think he's a good player, but you spent a first-round pick on something that you weren't really sure about. Like, you weren't sure which position he was going to play, and I think that's why some people were upset with the pick, not because of the player, because I do think he's going to be a very talented player, but because you drafted someone not really knowing who he is.
Well, you drafted exactly right. You drafted me like, well, I think ideally they did want him to play center and maybe McCoy to move guard, but then you learn like, oh wait, but Eric McCoy's been fantastic at center since day one. Like as a round 2 pick,
and you had day one,
it was fantastic.
I mean, you had that guy that could hold the spot for this year, and then there were some players that were selected behind Ruiz that you're like, man, he would have looked really good in purple and gold making plays on the defensive side of the football.
I'll never complain about going O-line in the first round, but it is, especially because they were so all in on last year at Breeze and everything. But hopefully you get a step. Hopefully Ruiz is one of those breakout players to justify that a bit more, because when you're talking about Ramchick, you're talking about like a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. That is his trajectory that he is on. And when you're talking about McCoy, as a second-round pick, like I said, I mean, he has stepped in and just been a solid to really good starter since day one. Carl Granderson's name is on this list, who actually ended up with 5 sacks this last year, and I did not realize. And in a world where, I don't know, okay, let's ask you the Trey Hendrickson question, because I don't know if we and you got to have this conversation, right? So Trey Hendrickson jumps from 4.5 sacks all the way to, what was the final tally, Danny? 14.5, 13.5?
That was 13.5.
13.5. Second in the NFL, right? What do you do with Trey Hendrickson? Do you pay him?
No, because I like the player, but you have other options at that position, including Davenport, who has got to step up. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
Your defensive line has got really talented pieces. You've got guys that can kind of be flexes. They can play inside or outside. You have Cam on the other side. And so right now, that's a position where you still have its strength. I think you've got to fill other holes on your team. Although you'd like to have the player back, I don't think it's the biggest need for you to spend that money.
And Granderson's an interesting case where, Nick dives into like all the film and everything and gives you some of the next level numbers. And one of these numbers is, so on top of the 4 sacks, Granderson averaged a pressure every 9 snaps that he played. For what it's worth, Marcus Davenport and Trey Hendrickson averaged a pressure for every 7 snaps. So, like, that's not that large of a gap. And obviously, Hendrickson got home more than anybody else, and he should be rewarded for that. But it does feel like Granderson maybe is a guy who had success in a smaller sample size.
Right.
And in a world where you got to make tough decisions, you probably feel okay about giving him more of an opportunity next year. And then here's the name. Look, well, before I get to the name that I really want to talk about, Marquez Callaway was great last year in terms of kind of coming out of nowhere. Late pick. Was he 7th round?
I think he was undrafted free agent.
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
The UDFA route. And by season's end, like, you were bummed when you heard that he was going to be out the game because he had developed both in the offense and on special teams. So I look for Callaway. Well, unfortunately for him and guys like Deontay Harris, Emmanuel Sanders, the other name on this list, so much of it's going to be quarterback dependent, right? I mean, so much of their potential success level, what ends up happening. Deontay Harris is a fascinating name. He really started to come on at the end of the year. Yeah.
Just got to stay healthy, and that's what you worry about with guys with his build. Like, can they take the NFL pounding? Can they take the day in and day out, rigors that are the NFL schedule? So when he's on the field, he has been dynamic. He's been fantastic. He's been their own little X factor weapon that we've seen so many teams have success with. But can he stay healthy? Because you're talking about a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean,
he almost won you a playoff game. Like against Tampa Bay, you take away those penalties, he could have set you up for the win there.
When I was in Denver and we had Trendon back there, like Trendon gave us an opportunity to score every time he touched the ball.
Yeah. Unfortunately, right. Speaking of scoring touchdowns in the playoffs, that game with Trendon.
Kick and punt.
Which is just absurd. And then, and how about this name? A guy that I know that you have had on the radio before, Adam Trautman.
Yeah.
Out of Dayton, man.
Adam Trautman would be my biggest potential breakout guy of any name you've said so far.
I think I'm with you because what we saw last year was so tantalizing. And I'm not just talking about catching the ball. That was great. As Nick points out, apparently he caught 93.8% of the passes thrown his direction, so he was automatic when you did throw him the ball. But his run blocking grades were fantastic
Some
this
of the
last
highest in
season.
the NFL.
Yes.
So this is a guy that came to Dayton as a quarterback. Okay, he got to Dayton as a quarterback, and they said, "Wait a minute, we've got other plans for you. Your body type. Let's move positions." And he was like, "Whatever, I want to play." So he gets on the field as a tight end, and obviously the competition level at Dayton compared to somewhere like LSU is not the same. But he's continued to get better each and every year he's played football. So I do radio with Ben Harsock, who played tight end for Ohio State. And whenever the Saints drafted him, he wrote me immediately. He goes, "Hey, this is the guy. I promise you." He's been kind of his mentor. He said, "This guy is going to develop and get better each year that he's in the NFL for the first 3 or 4 years." So we saw last year him be really good in an area that a lot of people thought he would struggle, run blocking. They didn't know, could he be a wide tight end?
I mean, if anything, you're thinking, okay, tall guy, he should be able to catch it. Catching, route running, I feel like that translates easier probably from Dayton to Villanova. How do you go from blocking at Dayton to then blocking
cats at Villanova?
Yes, and then you're blocking, I don't know, name any great edge defender. You're blocking the best, most highest paid defensive players in the NFL. It's
so
crazy.
that part of it, for that to show up already, that is a plus. And so when you look at his receiving skills, you mentioned it, he catches over 90% of his targets. He has got to take that next step because we don't expect Jared Cook to be back with this team. And we know the Saints like to use a tight end. And that's the thing with Troutman. He can be a Y or an F, and that's a different position. A Y is going to be more inline blocking, and F is going to be on the move. Well, he can do both of those things. So he is a guy that can take up 2 roster spaces if you allow him to do it. Now, you still got to have another tight end, obviously, on the roster, probably even 2. But Adam Trautman is ready to take that next step. And I think that he is going to be tight end 1 next year.
Yeah, and if we're exactly right, if the Saints are trying to save money, and so everything has to be weighed, and even if the Jared Cook fumble didn't happen last year, you would probably actually feel okay about making the switch from Cook to Troutman in order to save money because of Troutman's potential, and then the fumble from a fan perspective just helps you be like, yeah, screw it, let's cut Jared Cook.
Well, here's a stat that I love about Troutman. So he only had 171 receiving yards, right? But he also had 120 yards after the catch. So to give you an example of how good that is, Jared Cook had 504 receiving yards, only 116 yards after the catch. And so this is a guy that he can make plays in space. He can catch intermediate passes and make it into a play. So this is an athletic guy who is bought into being a blocker, which not everybody will do. I played with many of NFL guys that were like, I'm not interested in doing that, and I'm not going to try to better myself. And they're not in the league very long, okay? So he's already got the hardest part, which is inline blocking. I like what the future looks like for Adam Trautman.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham, not a blocker. Was
not real interested in sticking his head in there on a power, counter, ISO.
I should know this, but I don't. Was Antonio Gates a good blocker?
He was.
I know he's one of the best football players, obviously.
He was willing to do it, but it wasn't his favorite thing.
Okay.
That's why we had Randy McMichael.
Okay, there you go. All right, so talking about breakout players, check out NewOrleans.football by Nick Underhill. A great piece, fun conversation here on OTB. I think Troutman could have quite the impact next year. The offensive guys are interesting because what happens at quarterback? The eternal Saints question. All right, when we get back, a little more NFL talk. We'll talk some Pellies as well. Zion Williamson, that's right, baby. First All-Star game back in action against the Pistons tonight. Keep it locked right here on OTBLT.